this warm-up with a video instead of a written assignment. As you can see, I've started a new web page. I'm going to give that new web page a title. I'm going to call it Another DOM Events Warm-Up. And I'm going to save that thing. Saving. Okay, here it's reloading. Alright, now, since I've got it saved, I'm going to give myself a little more space. If I choose settings and change the height to 600 and then save that, what it does is you can see the screen adjusts size. Now, this thing is in the wrong place. I think if I refresh, it'll come back the way I want it. So let's just see. Yeah, there we go. All right, so I got a little bigger web page space to work with here. Okay, so the idea for this is I want to just, again, practice responding to events, setting event listeners, and I'm going to do that in a little bit different way today. I'm going to add a heading. I want this one just to be an H4, so it's a little smaller. And I'm going to put some instructions here, which are to click a color, and it will be added to the paragraph below the shapes. Now you're probably thinking, what is he talking about? I don't see any shapes. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to create a table of 4 squares. And so as you remember, the way you start a table is with a table tag. And I don't need a header row, so I'm just going to make 2 rows. And in each of my rows, I will have 2 cells. So we use TD to make the cells, remember. So now I have 2 cells in that row, and I'm going to make another row just like it. Right now there's no content in the table, so you can't see it. If I stick some content in there, like some S's, you'll see that I have a table of 4 S's. Not a very big table, but it's listed right there. We'll add some style to the table shortly. Underneath this table, I'm going to make a paragraph, and I want it to have an ID so that I can send some output to this paragraph. So right now it's an empty paragraph, but the output for my JavaScript will show up here. Just in case you want to see where it's located now, it's where all the H's are. Let's delete those. Okay, so in each of my cells, instead of these S's, I'm going to put a new div. And the divs are going to be styled. I'm going to add a class to each div. Each div will receive a color class and a size class. In this case, we're going to make a square. Notice I separated each of the classes by a space here because we're assigning 2 different classes. Let me show you what I mean. If I go up here to my header and I add a style tag and I add a class called square, I can set the min height of that rectangle to be something like 150, and I can set the min width to be 150. You still don't see that square, but if I make a class called red and set the background color, I spell background, to red, it shows up. So I have my first square. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make 3 other squares. So I'm just going to steal this div and insert it in the next cell. But this won't be class red. We'll make this class blue. So I need to make a blue style. So dot blue. And we'll set the background to blue. And now I have a blue square. Let's keep this thing rolling here. We're going to make a green square and a yellow square. So I got to add the class names, green and yellow. And then up here I need to make two more class definitions. One called yellow and we'll make yellow turn out yellow, and one called green, and we'll make green turn green. Okay, so I've got these 4 squares in a table, and we made them grow in size by setting the min height to 150. So right now each of these are 150, and as long as I don't put any other information in there, it'll stay at 150. Now I do want to add event listeners to each of these squares, so I need to assign an ID as well as a class. So the red square I'm going to have named ID red, and the blue square I'll call blue, and the green square I'll call green. Oops. Let's slide this over a little bit so I can see a little more of my code. I don't need it to be all that wide. Of course, that messed up my height. Green, not grebe, green, and my yellow square will be ID yellow. Okay, and then I'm going to save this, and actually I'm going to refresh again because I lost my height, which is going to be useful for me here in a minute. So I apologize for doing a refresh. There we go. I guess if I resize that, it's just going to mess with me. Okay, so we've got our divs set up, and now what I want to do is start to write some JavaScript so I can respond to some click events. And you know that we've been adding our scripts right before the body tag, so that's the last thing loaded. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up variables for my 4 rectangle, or my 4 squares, and then also one for my output paragraph, because I'm going to be listening for events from the squares and sending output to the output paragraph. So let's start with a variable. I'll call it red, and I will get the element by ID. I need the red one first, and then as you know, we can always copy and paste this. I need red, blue, green, and yellow, and I can just go back and change these to blue, green, and yellow. And I also need one for my output paragraph, so I'll paste one more in and leave a blank line there so it separates the buttons from the output. I'll make a variable called output, and that'll have my output paragraph. Okay, so I've assigned my variables. I need to make some handler functions, some callbacks. So for the first one, I'll call it onRedClick. And all I'm going to do for this warm-up is make this a function. And every time they click red, the red square, I want to add the word red to my output. And the way we accomplish that is we access the inner HTML property. So output.innerHTML. Instead of setting it equal to something, I'm going to add to the existing value. And the way you do that is you just take the value and you use the plus equals operator. So whatever's in there, I will add to it. I want to add the word red, and then I want a space after the word red, so the next thing that gets added doesn't squish right up to my word red. So my event handler for red is going to be simply to add the word red to my output paragraph. Right now there's nothing there, so the next time the red button gets clicked, red will be added. Don't forget that after you set the handler function, you need to also add an event listener. So I'll just do that right now. Red.add event listener. Oops. And I'm listening for the click event. That's the only event we've really used so far. And my callback function is on red click. Now when I click red, the word red shows up in my paragraph. And that will happen forever as long as I click red. Okay, notice right now when I click blue, nothing happens. So let's make a new event handler, and we'll just cheat a little and reuse our code here. I'll call this on blue click, and I'll put the word blue in my paragraph. And then down here I got to add an event listener for blue. So again, I'm going to just copy it. My blue event listener will call on blue click. It's always the add event listener method, the event you're listening for, which for us is a click, and the function you want to call when that event happens. Now, if I click red, red shows up. If I click blue, blue shows up. And I think you can see where this is going, so let's just add the last two in and we'll get this video over with. I'm going to have a yellow and a green. And last thing is a green. And I need a couple more event listeners, so I need a yellow and a green event listener. Not much to say as I'm typing. Just getting this code straightened out. And now, if I haven't made any typos, every time I click a square, the color will be added to the list. There we go. All right, and it's working. Now, this really isn't a very useful program. It was simply an exercise. I'm going to save here before I quit. It was an exercise in doing some styling and adding event listeners to some objects. So I'll just quickly show you the code here again, sort of line by line. The standard doc tags along with the heading comes when you start a new Khan Academy web page. We added the style. So we added a square style, which sets up the size of these squares. If you want to change the size of the squares, you can simply change these numbers and all the squares will change. Notice it still is functional. All right. We added the classes for red, blue, yellow, and green, simply setting the background color of those squares. And then the key is when you define the class for the div tags, you put each class in the quotes separated by a space. So we have the red class and the square class, the blue class and the square class, the green square, and so on. I also needed to add ID tags to each of these because we needed to access them from our JavaScript. Let me slide this over a little more just so this code is a little easier to read. There we go. All right. So each of those divs is assigned a different ID name. And finally, I made a paragraph, which also had an ID, so that's the paragraph where the words show up. When you write your code, you need variables to represent these objects. So I had the 4 colors plus the output paragraph. I needed 4 handler functions to handle the clicks of each of those squares. When you click the red square, I put red in the paragraph. When you click the blue square, I put blue in the paragraph, and so on. And finally, you add the event listeners at the end of your JavaScript, and they're turned on when they're called, and then the program simply just waits around until you click one of them, and then it adds the word to the HTML. Because these are added to a paragraph, it'll automatically word wrap when it gets to the end, the right side of the web page. So it's essentially just writing a paragraph here by clicking these buttons. So that's it for the video. That's the program. Your job is to recreate this and submit it. So good luck with that. Take care.